The voice is profoundly subjective. You know, this is not dispassionate narration. This is a man experiencing fevered conflicts with himself. He's in argument with himself all the time, and he doesn't know everything about his own narrative. We have it revealed in a very interesting way. The opening lines of the book draw attention to the fact that, you know, a story doesn't have to have a conventional trajectory from a beginning to an end. You know, sometimes you just come into the middle, which is, in a way, where we find Bendrix. He knows that his lover has mysteriously left him, and we find him in great pain. But he doesn't yet know why. So we have Graham Greene using Bendrix, the narrator, who knows a lot more than we do, and who knows a lot more than Bendrix, the character, at this point. So we come in at that point, and so we come in at a very subjective point at which certain things are not yet revealed. It's not only an absolutely fascinating glimpse at the world through the eyes of somebody who was living through London during World War II. It also, I think, somehow brings us up close to how much of human experience is not specific to London and World War II. I think it's almost in a more immediate and valuable way than if one were reading it at the time. You have jealousy, human emotion, suspicion, wrestling with the probabilities and improbabilities of religion, the ceremonies of marriage and death, registry offices, crematoriums, Catholic ceremonies, secular ceremonies. Those things are still argued about, and I think about 90% of what he's really talking about is still alive. This is a first person in complete confusion, in the grip of something. And I was fascinated by that as an actor, because what we do is by virtue of our job description, is to inhabit characters, is to attempt to immerse ourselves in a subjective point of view. And this invites that, not just with Bendrix, but obviously with Sarah. Bendrix really is talking in a very visceral way to us. The grammar is often rather eccentric, just because his thought process, Greene allows the thought processes to peter out. There are endless parentheses and parentheses within parentheses and digressions, and you have to follow those with an emotional engagement, because it is emotion that's often diverted his thought process. I think you have to bring yourself, but you also have to guard against yourself. It's a paradoxical exercise. You can start off thinking, I have nothing in common with this character, I have nothing in common with this world, I know nothing about this story, it's hopeless. And then you start to dig a little bit, and you find that there are connecting points and little tiny bits of this person's experience with which you overlap, and then they start to get stronger and stronger. And you often find yourself in a journey where you think, I've got everything in common with this person. A few of the superficial details might be different, but actually, he's me. In the service of the source material, you have to usurp it in some way. And there has to come a point when you leave it behind and say, I'm sorry, this was Mr. Greene, it's not yours anymore. Just for the moment, it's entirely mine. I've observed it, I've absorbed it, I've done as much as I can to to digest it. And now I have to be Bendrix for a while, or I have to be Sarah for a while. You just got to jump in and do it in the way you visualize. You've got a great help in the sense that your visual world is your own. Your stimuli are perfectly realized if you want them to be. A film set, I mean, if you walk onto a film set and you look at a perfectly lit set looking this way, you'll see a very nicely composed picture with period costumes and all the rest of it. It's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at technicians, lamps, machines, and it's a big challenge for me. My imaginative world is not is interfered with, and the things I'm looking at are of no help. It's actually a lot easier in the theatre when you're looking out at a uniform blackness on the fourth wall in a film set. It's ghastly, or people are moving about in front of you. It's brightly lit. Everything's out of sequence. You're doing it in tiny little snippets. You never get any momentum going. You never get a run at anything. When you're reading, you've got all that on your side. So in fact, all those things you're talking about on a film set aren't necessarily that helpful to your imagination. Yes, a costume might help. Yes, a location might help. But there's an awful lot conspiring against you. When I sit down in front of the microphone, I'm free to dream. With audiobooks, I think one of the things I relish most is hearing a voice which is authentically and profoundly connected to the culture you're hearing. Now, actors make changes. I mean, we have to be able to do that. You have to be able to accept an actor's skill in transforming if they have that skill. But there's no greater pleasure for me than, for instance, hearing Brendan Gleeson reading Roddy Doyle. I couldn't do that. I couldn't sound like I came from that very specific part of Dublin. And it revealed Roddy Doyle to me. I mean, I loved Roddy Doyle already, but that opened him up to me, and I can't read Roddy Doyle now without hearing those voices, which were the voices he intended for it. So I think it's a great gift to have an interpreter give you that. You know, I am not an Englishman of the 1940s, but I'm not that far from it. You know, my father would have been the age of Parkes's boy when this story was written. And I know the sounds well enough, I think. And I think that when you start to hear a voice, you are getting information. And if the voice is off and if it's misjudged, then you will start to get the wrong information. It'll throw you off the game. It'll divert you from what the writer's trying to say. So, you know, it is in the nuance. All you can really do is let it take you where it's going to take you. In the end, this is just my interpretation. A story has no beginning or end. Arbitrarily, one chooses that moment of experience from which to look back or from which to look ahead. I say one chooses with the inaccurate pride of a professional writer who, when he has been seriously noted at all, has been praised for his technical ability. But do I, in fact, of my own free will, choose that black, wet January night on the Common in 1946, the sight of Henry Miles slanting across the wide river of rain, or did these images choose me? A story has no beginning or end. Arbitrarily, one chooses that moment of experience from which to look back or from which to look ahead. I say chooses with the inaccurate pride of a professional writer who, when he has been seriously noted at all, has been praised for his technical ability. But do I, in fact, of my own free will, choose that black, wet January night on the Common in 1946? The sight of Henry Miles slanting across the wide river of rain? Or did these images choose me? If hate is not too large a term to use in relation to any human being, I hated Henry. I hated his wife, Sarah, too. And he, I suppose, came soon after the events of that evening to hate me. How can I make a stranger see her? As she stopped in the hall at the foot of the stairs and turned to us. I have never been able to describe even my fictitious characters except by their actions. It has always seemed to me that in a novel, the reader should be allowed to imagine a character in any way he chooses. I do not want to supply him with ready-made illustrations. Now I am betrayed by my own technique, for I do not want any other woman substituted for Sarah. Now I am betrayed by my own technique, for I do not want any other woman substituted for Sarah. I want the reader to see the one broad forehead, the bold mouth, the conformation of the skull, but all I can convey is an indeterminate figure turning in the dripping mackintosh, saying, "Yes, Henry?" and then, "You?" She had always called me you. "Is that you on the telephone? Can you? Will you? Do you?" So that I imagined, like a fool, for a few minutes at a time, there was only one you in the world, and that was me. She had always called me you. "Is that you on the telephone? Can you? Will you? Do you?" So that I imagined, like a fool, for a few minutes at a time, there was only one you in the world, and that was me. He put down his glass and said, "Bendrix, you had absolutely no right. I'm paying all the charges. It's infernal cheek." He stood up, but I had him penned where he couldn't get past without an act of violence, and violence wasn't in Henry's character. "Oh, surely you'd have liked her cleared," I said. "There was nothing to clear. I want to go, please. I think you ought to read the reports." "I have no intention." "Then I think I'll have to read you the bit about the surreptitious visits. Her love letter I returned to the detectives for filing. My dear Henry, you've been properly led up the garden. Sometimes I long to have it out with you, like we are doing now, and it's too late. I wanted to tell you what I thought of you." "What did you think?" "That you were her pimp. You pimped for me, you pimped for them, and now you're pimping for the latest one. The eternal pimp. Why don't you get angry, Henry?" "I never knew." "You pimped with your ignorance. You pimped by never learning how to make love with her, so she had to look elsewhere. You pimped by giving opportunities. You pimped by being a bore and a fool, so now somebody who isn't a bore and a fool is playing about with her in Cedar Road." Hate and suspicion and envy had driven me so far away that I read her words like a declaration of love from a stranger. I had expected plenty of evidence against her, and I so often caught her out in lies, and now here in writing that I could believe as I couldn't believe her voice was the complete answer. For it was the last couple of pages I read first, and I read them again at the end to make sure. It's a strange thing to discover and to believe that you are loved when you know that there is nothing in you for anybody but a parent or a God to love. 12th of February 1946. 2 days ago I had such a sense of peace and quiet and love. Life was going to be happy again. But last night I dreamed I was walking up a long staircase to meet Morris at the top. I was still happy because when I reached the top of the staircase we were going to make love. I called to him that I was coming, but it wasn't Morris's voice that answered. It was a stranger's that boomed like a foghorn warning lost ships and scared me. I thought first I would look for that day in June 1944 when everything ended, and after that, after I had discovered the reason for that, there were many other dates from which I could learn exactly, checking them with my diary, how it was that her love had petered out.